Universality is aggregated.
A horizon.
A very powerful claim.
Contested.
A scientific ideal, an aspiration, and often fragmented.
An idea that orients scientific participation towards particular goals.
Hello and welcome to this interview of the Max Planck Institute for Social Anthropology. My name is Jovan Maud, and today I'm talking to
Hanna Nieber,
Claudia Lang, Desirée Kumpf,
Vorhoelter,
Samiksha Bhan,
Hynek Bečka,
who are all authors of a special issue that was recently published in the Journal of Social and Cultural Anthropology, or Zeitschrift für Ethnologie, on the subject of universality in pieces, Mobilizations of Science in a Fractured World. All of the authors are members of the Department Anthropology of Politics and Governance at the Institute, or associates of the department. And this is a collaborative project that was set up and emerged out of a working group that was established in the department a few years ago. Could you tell me a little bit about how this project came to be?
The project particularly started through a working group that we had here at the Max Planck,
where we engaged with contemporary but also older texts that dealt with questions of
what is science, how does science work, together with questions of what is universality, how does science always claim to be something universal, and how is this universality actually enacted?
The group assembled in 2021, I believe, at FORES conference.
FORES being the
Society for Social Studies of Science.
And we co-organized a panel. And from this panel, this idea of maybe writing a special issue together developed.
All the questions, I have to say, have always been developed through the collaborative process itself. So the questions were not something that were there in the beginning already, but they really emerged out of the collaborative endeavor.
And how did you find this collaborative work?
I think it was really great working together with a great group of people who were all really committed to the idea of working collaboratively.
We were 7 scholars working on the introduction, and
each voice was taken as an equal voice. We tried to really work together and take account of each person's concerns.
We were all interested in questions around universality, but we approached universality from very different perspectives.
Yeah, it was an interesting puzzle involving a lot of creative work, creative thinking.
And that gave us a space to explore ideas collectively and to come up with concepts collectively, more importantly, because these concepts that we used in the special issue only emerged in conversation with different case studies in different parts of the world.
What is your article about?
My article is about universality as an aspiration, as a horizon, as it is felt by astrophysicists in Africa. I take inspiration from Paulin Hontonji, an African philosopher who has formulated universality as horizon, and then I explore what horizon means for astrophysics. The article investigates how horizons feature in astrophysical geometries and how universality is a value that people aspire to achieve.
My article is about the emergence of psychotherapy in Uganda, and it's based on fieldwork with Ugandan psychotherapists who've been among the first to teach and practice forms of talk therapy that are rooted in psychology rather than, say, in religious doctrines or so-called traditional healing. I discuss some of the very creative strategies they apply and also some of the challenges they face in making an already existing canon of knowledge and theory relevant to the life worlds of their Ugandan clients. And I think one thing I try to argue is that by, in a way, Ugandanizing psychology, they are also universalizing it. And that's something that I think is often not recognized. Like, I think it's still very common for Ugandan or African psychologists more broadly to be seen as recipients of psychological knowledge rather than as co-producers of it. And so I think one aim of the article is to really highlight this creative contribution that African psychologists and also sort of scientists in other fields are making to universal knowledge.
I explore camera traps as an example for immersive methods in ecological research that make scientists feel a sense of connection to the environments that they study. And I find that this way of working inspires in some scientists a notion of universal interconnection between human life and all other aspects of life on Earth.
I follow COVID skeptics and their understanding of universal science. And I think there has been this idea that somehow COVID skeptics are against science, but from their perspective, they very much love and admire science, and they feel that they should be able to contribute to it. So they somehow claim that science should be open to participation for everyone, and they do participate from their own perspective in scientific knowledge making by observing their bodies, by observing the world around them, by doing research, reading all sorts of articles and making some knowledge claims. Which they feel they should be able to do, not just scientific experts, but the conclusions they come to are often very different from those of mainstream science.
This article is actually co-written with an Indian colleague, Sonali Satay, and in this article we look at a mental health app which is called Wiser, that is designed in India for a usership in India and worldwide.
My article looks at Indian geneticists and how they calibrate populations in India to include them into global genomics research. By doing so, they claim inclusion not only for the Indian population groups, which remain underrepresented in genomics research, and thus their diseases remain under-researched and ignored, but also they claim inclusion for themselves in a global science.
How do you approach universality?
I'm approaching the notion of universality as a highly contested claim, which somehow can be mobilized and used and aspired to by all sorts of different groups, COVID skeptics being one of them.
My research elaborates universality, or a current notion of universality that is not so much concerned with the universal human, but instead focuses on the idea of universal interconnection between human activity and the planetary ecosystem.
My article approaches universality as a practice in motion. I have argued that geneticists in India actively participate in the global science of genomics by fragmenting the Indian population. By doing so, they claim inclusion for themselves as well in participating in this global scientific research. While their own scientific findings sound the limits of universality, they actively recognize the need to translate universality on the ground and make it applicable for public health futures in India.
Actually, if you look at such an app, the question emerges how universal such an app can be, or more specifically, how universality is produced in this app. And so on the one hand, we found that users really work with the assumption of a universal psyche, or there's certain needs, emotional and psychological needs, that they really assume to be universal, such as the need for being listened to, right? For a need for an empathetic listener or an empathetic response at the right time. But on the other hand, we found that in this app, universality is also produced, and it is produced by aggregating data.
My article shows that universality is not something that can ever be fully achieved, but something that people aspire to. So the astrophysicists in Africa, they aspire to have this common framework with all astrophysicists on the globe, even if they know that local particular conditions will always matter.
Universality, in my reading, is never a property of knowledge in the abstract, but something that becomes graspable when particular forms of knowledge become relevant to people in very different places at sort of specific times. So I find it helpful to think not so much of universality as an end product or a fact or something that's finished, but of universalizing as a process.
What is the significance of talking about universality today?
it is important to study universality today because notions of universality change.
Universality is a powerful claim that people make, and I think in the contemporary moment where there's so much
contestation of any kind of universal knowledge, and especially how universal knowledges give way to particular kinds of authorities in the world which invisibilize alternative ways of knowing.
So we can have universality in spite of, or maybe even because of, diversity and multiplicity. And this is something that I really like, because usually anthropologists are quite critical about this, about universality.
Because anthropologists usually focus on the particular. But I think today's world shows us that universality as an aspiration still has value even for the particular cases. And I think we mustn't forget that we have these broader common themes that we also need to take account of.
To question what universality actually means and to understand better why different people reject it or try to claim it, and with what consequences.
And I think that's what our special issue is speaking to.